Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first in our webinar series on Office of the CFO. We're happy to talk to you today about, a very specific topic, which is scenario planning for workforce and headcount. So we'll quickly, here's the agenda. We're going to, talk a little bit about Accelytics, introduce, myself and Stephen Ganatovich. We'll do an overview of the Office of the CFO, and then we'll go into, the topic and the problem statement of the topic itself. And then as part of the discussion, we're going to sort of walk through an example and talk about, the inherent challenges in sort of a real world example and how we've solved that through Anaplan. And then we'll wrap it up with a question and answer any feedback.
So a bit about us as an organization. Accelytics was established in 2015 as an Oracle consultancy. Have shifted a bunch of the work, is currently in the Anaplan space. Anaplan's a multidimensional modeling platform. Partnership was established in 2017, and the work has kind of snowballed since. So a bunch of the work is related to workforce planning, which is what we're going to talk about today, but can happily follow up in the future on some of the other work that we do in supply chain and SPM and incentive comp. Those are the three main practices there. 40 plus tenured technology and process experts throughout US and Canada. Really pride ourselves in bringing on seasoned, experienced folks that really know the industry as well as the technology. And then also very proud to boast one of the highest percentage of master Anaplanners on staff in the ecosystem.
So a little bit about us. My name is Mike Newberry. I am the Vice President and Finance Practice Lead. A little bit about me. So in addition to 10 plus years doing management consulting, I've also spent 15 plus years in finance leadership roles in different industries. So a lot of our webinar topics as we go forward are going to be about situations we've seen at our clients, but also situations that I've seen, as part of my teams and challenges that they've faced. Go ahead, Stephen.
Thanks. I've spent the last probably 5 years or so working on the Anaplan platform. That started Anaplan itself and then have been in the partner ecosystem for quite a while. So implemented, really a full host of Anaplan solutions. And that's from, master data management all the way to, the data-centric end to more, functional and purely reporting kind of use cases. So, across a whole host of industries as well. So in, automotive, high tech, private equity and real estate. And really pride myself on figuring out how Anaplan can fit as the glue in the organization, right? I think that's very important for thinking about technology development.
So quickly, an overview of, sort of how our webinar series is, going to, evolve as we go forward. One of the main themes that we'll see in all of our topics is sort of this evolving role of the CFO that we're going to get into more specifically. Secondly, is really around empowering finance teams to deliver strategic value, which is right in line with sort of this evolving role and evolving expectations for the CFO. And as I mentioned earlier, today's topic is really one that we're seeing a lot in our clients right now. It's scenario planning for specifically workforce and headcount.
So in addition to that, today we'll go through and throughout this webinar series, we'll go through real world examples and inherent challenges. And Mike and I, in talking about this, realize a lot of them come down to data, black box technology, insights versus data collection, and then actually investing in that transformation. So from the data perspective, that's really spreadsheet reliance. I love this concept of, unremarkable things doing remarkable things, right? And that's really the example of Excel in organizations, right? There's such heavy spreadsheet reliance in, big, massive organizations. And then the data management piece just hasn't really kept up with the speed of change in the rest of the organization. And COVID aside, that was still true in 2019, that the goals of the organization move a lot faster than the ability to keep up with that data. And then for highly evolved technology organizations, it's the trade-off is that the technology really becomes more black box, and there's solutions like Anaplan in the marketplace that really open that up, so it's less reliant on IT and more heavily used by the business. Financial performance versus insight and analytics. To Mike's point about empowering finance teams, this is really what that piece is, right? It's enabling these teams rather than spending times jockeying with spreadsheets. They're really spending time doing much more analysis in platforms like Anaplan, and that does take investment up front. That it really does pay dividends down the line.
So as I mentioned before, really this evolution of the office of the CFO that we've seen for a while now, and we continue to see evolve into different things, is really at the center of the topics that we're talking about. And so when I say the role of the CFO and how it has evolved, really the expectations for finance organizations have changed. It used to be sort of we're a back office organization that's closing the books and producing some variant of variance reports, to very quickly the expectation is that you're a business partner delivering insights to the enterprise and providing decision support to really help run the business. And so with that, the teams are really being tasked with being able to better leverage data for the enterprise, to really drive value, and then empowering the business with these real-time insights. So I've heard this in many situations. I'm blind running my business. I need more information, and it's not just information that's reactive in a report. I need more proactive information, to be able to make real-time decisions or decisions ahead of time to run my business. So as part of this, the problem is not just in finance itself. The problem, that's being faced is really, an enterprise-wide one. So therefore, the CFO is really becoming the de facto lead for digital transformation. And so, the challenge that many organizations are facing is that finance teams are really not empowered or equipped to in real time change the organization to deliver strategic value across the enterprise, even though they're being asked to and the expectations are increasing. In sort of encompassing the challenges being faced, it's really around sort of data, enabling technology, this role shift from sort of back office to a strategic business partner, and then really becoming sort of analytical resources are barriers that companies are facing, and realizing the potential of that finance function, in what they have to offer, and really empowering this data driven decision making that improves performance across the enterprise, which is a good thing for everyone. I mentioned this, in describing sort of the evolution of the CFO, but really the digital, transformation challenges that we continue to see, at a high level is really data. Where organizations are really struggling to capture data efficiently and effectively. They're relying upon, manual data collection, which are time-consuming processes. And so just sort of getting the data together to be able to, put together any analysis has really become a challenge. You combine that with sort of these enabling technology, challenges, and it becomes even more difficult because, a lot of the designs in previous implementations of technology are just not nimble enough to handle the speed of change we're seeing in the marketplace right now. And so finance organizations often mention that they're, one event, like a restructuring or mergers and acquisitions away from, really making their current enabling technology obsolete and sort of forcing them into Excel to be able to do their job. I mentioned also the analytical piece, to be able to, if you're struggling with data and you don't really have enabling technology to connect the enterprise, it's very difficult to do scenario modeling and analytical work, because you're spending all your time just putting together, the data to be able to do any analysis. And so, it's really trying to address time spent on financial performance, through better collection of data and enabling technology. And then lastly, and I think this is one that I've seen very specifically amongst my own finance teams in terms of trying to change, the culture of the finance organization to this evolving expectations of the, the finance teams themselves, is, the shift to strategic advisor business partner is often a really significant role in cultural change that needs to be recognized and addressed. I mean, if you have a finance person that is, their main job has been to do reporting and write variance analysis, and all of a sudden you're expecting them to, build proactive analytical models to help a general manager, run a division of a business, that's a significant role shift. And so, some of the things that we, need to look at as part of any digital transformation is really what that means to the roles and their responsibilities.
So we wanted to look at, what are some of the root causes for increasing the need for something like Anaplan in connected planning and scenario planning there. The first we thought we came up with was just the pace of change. And this was something that was true, pre-COVID, right? And I hit on this earlier, that the speed at which organizations want to change is really faster than the data and the teams and that enablement that Mike spoke about really can keep up with. And the downside to this is that when that happens, people resort to where they're comfortable. And that's, so for these things like ad hoc modeling or coming up with different scenarios, right? These tend to live in spin-off proliferated Excel workbook. As that speed increases, it increases the pressure, on teams and organizations to keep up with that planning. When that happens, the systems just can't keep up, right? And the downside to that is that everyone creates these, right? So it's not just a couple workbooks now live in Excel that the business is heavily reliant on. It's everyone is doing these. You lose a common set of data. You lose that ability to really come up with any kind of consensus plan. And when you lose that, we'll hit on this importance of the baseline later. When you lose that baseline foundation, the scenario plans on top of that really just become, kind of exercises, individual exercises. Part of the reason why this happens, right, this is cyclical, right, is that there's just less trust in the data. When everyone is creating these kind of spin-off Excel models, you lose that really foundational source of what did my forecast look like? So, if you do something like a reforecast, your baseline is completely screwed then. So we have this, something that we hear a lot of time is this idea of patchwork Excel, right? And it's kind of the reason a lot of times why you need VBA, right? It is to tie different Excel workbooks together and just make sense of that data. And that there's a time and a place for Excel, 100%, but in situations where you're creating scenarios for the future based on a baseline, really need something much more kind of foundational. You should rely on your systems to do that.
So Stephen had, really set up why, scenario planning and the need for sort of connected scenario planning is, the root causes that sort of precipitate those discussions. For our topic today, scenario planning, for the workforce and headcount, the reason it's so important, just to touch on a couple of things, is that really, the staff or the workforce expense, is almost always the largest in the organization. And, more than ever, it really requires sort of this alignment of a lot of constantly changing data from different areas. You have different source systems that provide different components of that. Oftentimes there's a lot of people, you might have HR managers or HR business partners involved, across the enterprise to be able to, answer questions or model a scenario. So it becomes very difficult because of all of the disparate pieces to be able to, gather information on what is your largest expense. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the large company actions like corporate restructuring, mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, business performance challenges, all just have a major impact on workforce. And, in most situations, they really tend to blow up the existing models, which are in Excel, because, they're just not nimble enough to be able to modify and handle change. And then sort of the last piece that we see is that, workforce is really impacted by almost every other scenario that's being contemplated in the enterprise. So, as this increased need for scenario planning, exist, whether it be revenue, demand planning, all of these different things across the enterprise, almost all of them have an impact on workforce. And so being able to utilize it independently or as part of overall scenario planning has just become, more critical than ever. So, what we wanted to do quickly to, sort of illustrate the challenges that are, existing in this topic is really just go through an example. And so starting with the baseline, and I've done this in my role many times. If you think about a budget process, you go into starting to set up your budget and, being able to build it. You have this, large existing employee population. And as part of that existing employee population, you have attributes that you need to put together to be able to, not only plan for your budget, but eventually if you're looking to do scenario planning, you have to associate that with employees, salary, bonus, team, level, all of these different things that could potentially be asked in scenarios really have to be housed with those employees. As we've mentioned a couple of times, the challenge really becomes is, all of these things come from disparate data sources, HR business partners, different source systems, or finance people maintaining them themselves. And Stephen will talk a little bit about sort of this employee file as he's seen this in the Anaplan world.
It really almost becomes kind of a joke hearing this phrase of the employee file when we go in to do something like an Anaplan implementation, right? Because there's always this file that exists, and it's a combination of current headcount. Maybe that comes out of something like Workday. It probably combines actuals from, maybe that's an ADP or something like that, right? That brings in the actual payroll data. We'll hit on transfers and, like the change report in a second, which is a different thing like that, right? But this is an actual kind of living and breathing Excel file that people are spending hours just combining these different data sources to get to this file. And it can really be such a breath of fresh air when we create this same kind of infrastructure in Anaplan. You just kind of lose that need to do all of the legwork to create that employee file. It just becomes really a living module in Anaplan that stays constantly, updated and connected to your source system. So that employee file is not only the starting point for, an Anaplan implementation as it relates to headcount, but really the starting point for, everything that we're going to discuss in the future, right here, or discuss going forward here, that the budget reporting and different scenario planning as well.
Yeah, and just to sort of, add to that, when you get into the second piece of it, which you're trying to plan for joiners, leavers, and transfers, and you have this, the employee file that Stephen talks about, the thing with workforce is that, oftentimes you're planning this baseline that's going to be used for your forecast going forward, that's going to be used for any scenario planning going forward, on a monthly, quarterly basis, sometimes even quicker than that. If you think about this in the disparate data sources that you're having, oftentimes this data is changing every day. Someone goes on a leave of absence, someone decides to leave, all of these different things happen on a constant basis. And so if you think about that employee file, which becomes your baseline for everything, by the time you put that together 3 months before your budget, it's had so many changes between then and the time that you actually start the year that if you don't have one place to do it, it's just you're constantly chasing your tail. Okay, so that sort of feeds into the next piece, which is enabling scenario planning. So if we start with sort of our baseline file, the employee file, now we've started the year, so our budget's in full force, and then this employee file becomes, as I mentioned, a living, breathing file. And in a life which I've lived in Excel doing this, It's weekly meetings with multiple HR partners. It's pulling feeds quite often from different source systems to, be able to keep this employee file as accurate as possible, because, there are often questions that come from, the CEO or the CFO of an organization all the time about where are we at with, workforce expense, is just one simple thing. And then when you get into different scenarios that would happen, it becomes even more, difficult if you're doing that in Excel and you're relying upon all of these disparate data sources to be able to, keep this file intact and perform any sort of scenario planning.
It builds to a crescendo here, right? Where you're required to maintain the system of records. So if that's, things like Workday for people management, then you have to layer in employee changes onto that. If that's, maybe that's created in Workday, but then feeds out of there. You're still maintaining this employee file. So all of that, if that's VBA or just advanced Excel work, that still needs to be maintained. And now you're layering in a constant stream of actuals and forecast into this, this file that's close to growing legs onto it, right? So it becomes so difficult for those finance teams and the people required to kind of execute these analyses to synthesize all of this together, right? And stay up to the needs with the office of the CFO.
Yeah, and in our last few minutes here, we'll just quickly touch on some of these major events that happen that, that I've seen personally, and our clients have faced the same thing, blow up these files. Whether you have a corporate restructuring that can, change all the hierarchies, and whether it be, mergers and acquisitions. I mean, if you think about, you're 2 months in and you acquire a small company, that adds to your population, how do you get them set up without, setting up another Excel file? And so it's these types of things combined with, business performance challenges, even, where, you're being asked to run scenarios based on, either positive business performance or negative business performance. I mean, that can send a rapid impact throughout the organization, and scenarios are being asked constantly around those things, and, and supporting any of those decision-making things, or being able to handle an acquisition, or being able to encompass a corporate restructuring. I mean, those are just major impacts to, as you can see, to that employee file, and to be able to do any type of scenario planning, and often, are the driver for, forcing these things in Excel and sort of blowing up finance to some degree.
One of the things that we focus on as a consulting organization that works a lot with Anaplan is getting that master data management strategy right. I think maybe the most advantageous thing about a product like Anaplan is that when that metadata is organized in a way that can be consumed by Anaplan, it is so easy to make these hierarchical changes and add on to them, right? That maybe the original hierarchies need to stay, but now you've introduced different reporting hierarchies or things like that. And Anaplan those hierarchies can be created in really seconds, right? And updated as the business makes the changes constantly. So it doesn't become this, onerous task to, shuffle hierarchies and maintain effective dated hierarchies for something in the past, right? It really does kind of grow with the organization and keep up with the speed of the office of the CFO. And then just some of the other advantages to why Anaplan is so great here, right? It's, the first thing is that it's a single platform, right? So you certainly still have your systems of record. Anaplan in some cases will perform that task, but most of the time Anaplan just consolidates all of those, sources of truth into one single platform, so that everyone's using the same baseline, everyone's using those, same sets of hierarchies, and then the changes as they're made and agreed on throughout the organization proliferate and spread through everyone else's models, right? So it levels the playing field, and really unites everyone around working towards the same goal in one platform. And then, Anaplan's recognized and Gartner recognized for a bunch of different use cases, right? It's the only product that's recognized for so many use cases with one single product. But really, I think the advantage to Anaplan is that it's just the nicest lightweight modeling engine that I've seen in the EPM space. It's, a lot of the formulas are written kind of English language. It's pretty easy to decipher with proper training and some upfront investment in that. And then you can layer on these different scenarios, as Mike hit on, just so nicely. And then evolve those scenarios, as you choose different scenarios, those can become your forecasts for, budgets and plans for future years. And then the patented technology that it's built on is this hyperblock engine. It's really what connects all cells to one another. So when you think of this like this is like a systemized approach to, Excel workbooks with macros that don't break, right? So the cells are all linked, and then all changes made in one place impact the rest of the model. And really, it's, billions of cells. Oftentimes we'll see organizations that are required to move off of something like Excel just because their workbooks are breaking. Those are kind of the scariest implementations, right? Because there's a time crunch on it, and really these are all systems go Excel workbooks, and they've just kind of lost the ability to meet the needs of big data sets. And Anaplan can do those kinds of calculations with billions of cells with no problem.
Well, that's our topic for today. I hope you can see we love talking about this. So if you'd like to continue to have a conversation, we'd love to talk more about this. And thanks for listening. We'll see you at our next one.